Leicester City are the real shock, I think, just because the sort of value of their squad. It's crept up on them, hasn't it, relegation? And I think they've not really taken it that seriously until now. So once the dust has settled from yesterday, how do you think they'll move forward?
It's going to be a really difficult job for whoever ends up in charge of Leicester next season because, like you say, this squad doesn't seem prepared for a championship fight. We don't know who's even going to be there next season. There are a lot of players out of contract. We're looking at the likes of Harvey Barnes and James Maddison and thinking they'll probably move on as well. So what Leicester's squad will even look like next season could be completely unrecognisable. And that's really weird from a neutral point of view to think about Leicester because coming off the back of, and it's Leicester fans will be sick of us talking about it to a degree, coming off the back of the title winning season and the FA Cup win, there were a few names that just were constantly around that squad that you got really familiar with. And we might be looking at a completely different team soon. It's mental. All season I've just assumed Leicester would have enough to get themselves out of it because that squad is far too good to be relegated in theory.
Yeah.
But it's fallen apart at the worst moment, hasn't it?
Well, there's a lot being said of how and why this even happened. Because, I mean, an 8th place finish last season, Brendan Rodgers at the time was just admitting, they need a few more signings to kick on. And those signings never really came. So there's question marks over, the financial state of the club and whether they could have invested better, if at all, because they left it till the last moment of transfer deadline day to sound out fast, didn't they? And that was their only signing in the summer. So, yeah, a difficult start to the season. And I think mentally and psychologically, it felt like with a few players dwindling down their last year of their contract, maybe this wasn't going to be a season for them to succeed in any aspect, really. And it's actually been worse than that. They've not just found no real consistency or anything momentum-wise from last season. They've slid so far down that they've got relegated. And it is a shock, I think, to everybody, including themselves. I think they look surprised in all the post-match interviews after beating West Ham to be relegated. It's devastating for the club. But financially, there's hints there that they were struggling like this season with making ends meet and trying to maintain that top 10 finish. And with every other team around them improving, it was kind of no surprise really that they were going to finish in the bottom half. But why relegation, do you think? Why is the bottom 3 place been realistic for them now in this last few weeks? Because, like I say, it's crept up.
They've been unfortunate in some areas. There's been injuries to key players at really pivotal times that have hurt them. But I think looking at their summer and how poor the recruitment was, those players that are coming towards the end of their time at Leicester, it reaffirms that, doesn't it? If you look at the club you're at and see such a lack of ambition, and you're someone like Yuri Tielemans, who's still relatively young, will have a very successful career undoubtedly. Are you really that invested in Leicester this season? Not to say he's not been trying. I think that would be a bit harsh to level up players in the last year of their contract. But when you're facing financial difficulty and you're letting assets just completely run their contract down and then not doing anything to improve on that squad, it's a dangerous position. Yeah. Look at someone like Iosi Perez. Now, he's been out on loan the second half of the season, but they spent 30 million on Perez and he's out of contract in the summer as well. And you think, well, of course Leicester are struggling to recruit because if they're spending 30 million on Perez, I think it was 32 on Tielemans, and then those players are leaving on a free. Soyuncu's leaving on a free, a player that would have had much higher market value 12 months ago.
Yeah.
Leicester have kind of failed to capitalise on the value of some of those players, which is really odd for Leicester when you think about the sales of like Ben Chilwell, Harry Maguire, Riyad Mahrez and Kante. Although they wouldn't have wanted to lose those players, they brought in really sizable sums for them. And it felt like Leicester were really well run. And then all of a sudden, it looks like they've kind of panicked. I don't really know why Leicester are struggling for money.
I think it's down to the pandemic.
Weird.
I think that what I've heard is because King Power was so reliant on, well, it's a duty-free company, isn't it? So without any flights, there's no duty-free. So they've struggled for income and cash flow. So they've had to make other aspects of their businesses kind of tighten their belts a little bit. But that said, like you say, they could have capitalised on the value of some of their more high-value players at a different point. I mean, I'm sure Man City were interested in Soyuncu a couple of seasons ago.
Yeah, they were.
On the back of Harry Maguire leaving, Soyuncu became their best defender. So they could have sold him. Tielemans could have gone to Arsenal last season, right? I think he's in line for them for his final year of his contract. They could have got 30 mil back for him easily. So mismanagement really at many levels. And I suppose that shows the naivety of the ownership not really being football club owners until now, really, doesn't it?
And now as well, You're going to lose Maddison for much cheaper than you would have if you were in the Premier League, because every club knows he's available. He's not going to want to play Championship football next season. You probably lose Harvey Barnes, who, had Leicester stayed up, I wonder if Barnes would have stayed, to be honest. But there's no way he's playing Championship football next season. I'd be amazed if that happened. Tielemans will go on a free, Soyuncu will go on a free, and Leicester have got to rebuild from a position where they're losing Premier League money. They'll get the parachute payment, obviously. That might help them to a degree, but I don't know. It's going to be a funny old job with Leicester, and I don't know what they're going to have left. The irony is, I actually think if Smith had kept them in the Premier League, they would have replaced him as manager.
Yeah.
Now that they've gone down, I think he's probably the right man for the Leicester job. And that's such a weird feeling, isn't it? That essentially he's failed at the objective, but is probably the best man for the job now. I hope they stick with him, to be honest.
Although in his post-match, I think he said my remit was to keep them in the Premier League, and I failed at doing that. And he almost had this resignation in his voice, like, I can't do any more with this squad and with this team. So I think even he felt it was probably unfairly dealt a hand at such a late level to do anything with it. And again, that raises the question about losing your manager at a certain point of the season. Is it worthwhile at a certain point, or do you just stick out with what you've got? I mean, could Brendan Rodgers have done any better is the question. But we look forward, don't we, to see what Leicester can do in the Championship, which, again, it's been a few years since they were in this situation. So how they adapt will be interesting. I think, knowing their reputation for scouting, they'll probably find some hidden gems in the Football League they can call upon, and enough to get them back up to the Premier League in the first couple of seasons, hopefully. But if they don't bounce back quickly, you don't know how long they're going to stay there. That's the nature of it.
I have got faith that Leicester will be back quickly, if I'm honest. I think as a club that they look the most proficient. And when the team goes down, there is always that worry of how long are they going to stay down. We'll talk about Leeds shortly, I'm sure, and I can see them staying down there for a few years again. Whereas Leicester, I do think we'll see them back in the Premier League very quickly. I just think that they've got too much of a modern history that they can't afford to be out of the spotlight of the Premier League for long. And I think they will put a lot into getting back, whatever they can anyway. And if you think about, all right, we're saying that they'll get reduced fees for players like Maddison and Barnes. It's still going to be far more than any other Championship club's going to be able to spend in the summer. So they've got the tools, they've got the stadium, they've got an amazing fan base, they've got a great culture around the club that might have diminished a little bit this season. But it's funny, I've seen it from Villa's point of view. When a big club goes through a period of losing games, the Championship can be quite refreshing for a fan base to see the momentum build again. When Leicester fans are behind their team winning game week after week, things change there very quickly. They might actually come into the Premier League in a slightly better shape again if they can get promoted back.